So the first question I have for you, the audience, is how many senses do we have? This seems like a really simple question, but if you take a moment to think about it, the five senses, of course, that they've taught you since kindergarten are sight, smell, hearing, taste, and touch, right? Problem solved? Well, what about when you're feeling too cold out today or too hot in the summer? What about when something pricks your skin, or when you feel dizzy because you've been losing your balance a little bit, or on the other hand, you're able to maintain your balance? Those are all senses as well. And I'm not honestly sure why the kindergarten teachers of the world keep lying to us by telling us that we only have five. So there are actually, in my mind, 10 senses that we need to know about. The five of them are categorized into what are called special senses. Okay, those are located cranially. They're only in your head. You could say these are all in your head if you want. And they are called special because they are located in special organs designed specifically for that job. The other five are general senses. Those are distributed throughout the body, sometimes in the cranial region and sometimes in the spinal region of the nervous system. And they are distributed usually within other organs. So within the skin or the muscles are common places for them. All right, so which are our special senses? The first special sense, the most obvious one, I guess, is that you're seeing me right now. So that is the sense of vision. And the special organ that comes from is, of course, the eye. Okay? You're also right now listening to me give this lecture, presumably, so that would be the sense of audition, also known as hearing. And it comes from an organ called the ear. But that's not all the ear does. The ear also provides us with a second special sense called equilibrium. The sense of equilibrium is your sense of motion and or stability. It's your sense of which direction is up, which way is up and down, how your body is moving or not moving, whether you are stable or not. Then we have two more of the five kindergarten senses. We have taste, which is officially known as gustation. Or the gustatory sense. And then smell, which is officially known as olfaction, or the olfactory sense. You can turn any of these into an adjective instead of a noun. You have visual, auditory, equilibrial, gustatory, and olfactory. And of course, the gustation or taste is provided by the tongue part of it, organs called taste buds within the tongue, and the olfaction is provided by the nasal epithelium. More on both of those at the end of this mini lecture. All right, so that gives us our special senses. Those are the fairly obvious ones. What about general senses? We have, first off, we're going to take that last of the five kindergarten senses, touch, and we're going to break it into two different categories. We have the tactile sense sometimes called light touch. Okay, light touch is when something just briefly touches your skin and you're aware of it, or it's what allows us to pick up this marker and see that it's smooth versus this towel and feel that it is rough. So it's those very light, detailed touches. A different sense is the what are called the barosenses. Okay, those are senses that detect pressure or stretch. Okay, so-called deep touch in your skin is a barosense. It senses how deeply something is pressing on your skin, or alternatively, how much your skin is being stretched by something. But the barosenses also exist inside, deep within your body, as for example, as your blood pressure rises, your blood vessels are stretched and your heart is stretched, and those barosenses inform your body about changes in your blood pressure. Leaving then entirely the category, the world of kindergarten, we've got three more senses that they didn't tell you about. One is the sense of temperature. Which, if we keep with turning things into nice official Latin words, that would be your thermal sense. And again, you have both an external thermal sense, an awareness of whether the environment around you is hot or cold, whether you put your hand in water, is it scalding or is it freezing? But you also have an internal thermostat, an internal temperature sense that tells you whether your body is, your core body temperature is too hot or too cold. Which is mostly an unconscious or visceral sense until at some point it gets to be, you're feeling so hot, running a fever, or so cold, hypothermia, that you become aware of it. The next one is not the sense we really like to think about. It's the sense of pain. But you could make an argument that that's one of the most important senses we have, that being able to tell whether a part of your body is damaged or not is a very important sense. Okay, so that is essentially it's a sense of tissue damage of one sort or another. And then finally, the last set of general senses are called the chemosenses. These senses are senses that we are almost never aware of, but detect whether or not, except that gustation and olfaction are special cases of chemical senses. But the internal or general chemosenses detect body chemistry, usually blood chemistry. For example, you have sensors that tell your body when there is too much oxygen in the environment, or in the blood, or too little oxygen in the blood, too much or too little carbon dioxide, or whether the pH of your blood is too high or too low. All right, to put that in context again, recall we've looked at the nervous system as having, there is a central nervous system that includes the brain and the spinal cord, which communicate with each other. And then there are cranial nerves that communicate in and out to the brain, and there are spinal nerves that communicate in and out to the spinal cord. But while some of those nerves are bidirectional, we can represent this really as two different sets of information that we have. Afferent or sensory information, and of course we have efferent or motor information. Okay, so at both the cranial nervous system level and the spinal nervous system level, we have afferent sensory information and efferent motor information. The only real difference between those two is that the sensory information at the spinal cord level always comes from the general senses, whereas at the cranial nerve level, we also are getting information from the special senses. Okay, so where we're going to be today is we're going to be talking about the sensory receptors as a whole, and then we're going to go to, we'll give a couple of examples of general sensory receptors and a couple of examples, namely the taste buds and the olfactory receptors of special sensory receptors. So in general, what is a sensory receptor? A receptor, in its most essential definition, is something that detects a stimulus. Okay? A stimulus is a change in the internal or external environment. Usually we think of stimuli as external environment things. You see a visual stimulus, you hear an auditory stimulus, you feel a touch on your body, but you can also feel the rumbling of your stomach. You can feel the distension of your bladder. There are all sorts of internal stimuli as well. Okay, so far so good, but what is a stimulus physically speaking? Every stimulus involves some form of energy, okay? And I am here sounding somewhere between giving a physics lecture and some sort of new age energy therapy kind of thing. But what I mean by this is that touching your hand is a form of physical energy. A visual stimulus coming into your eye, that's light energy, okay? Sound energy comes into your ears, and there is chemical energy felt in your body when you taste something or when your blood chemistry changes. There's more mechanical energy whenever your stomach or your bladder stretches. All of those things are some kind of energy that can be detected by the body. So that's what a stimulus is. A sensation, okay, any sort of sensory impulse that comes into our, in through our afferent nerves to our central nervous system is called a sensation. A sensation is the nervous system becoming aware of a stimulus, okay? Every sensation is carried by neurons, and neurons do not carry physical, mechanical energy. They do not carry chemical energy. They do not carry light energy. They always use electrical energy, right? Remember all those action potentials that we've been talking about. So something has to translate between these forms of energy. All right, so in essence, sound light, touch, temperature, all of these things are energy speaking in a different language than the language of our nervous system. So the translator is called a sensory receptor. Every sensory receptor is sensitive to one form of energy and therefore produces nerve signals, electrical potentials, remember, as a result of translating that incoming energy into a form of energy that the nervous system can understand. So what are some of the ways we can think about different sensory receptors? We can talk about where the energy, where the signal, where the stimulus comes from, okay? From the outside world, that's the exterior of your body, so those are called exteroceptors. And scepter is from receptor, so exteroceptors. Internal body conditions would be then the opposite of external is internal, so interoceptors. Now you may think, okay, external and internal covers all the bases. What could possibly be left? Well, there's outside the body, there's inside the body, and there's where the body is itself, okay? And those are called proprioceptors, okay? Proprioception is one of the newer senses that we've become aware of. It turns out that every muscle in your body has a piece, something called a muscle spindle organ that detects how far stretched that muscle is. And your brain, by keeping track of, I should say, the size of each body part and how stretched each muscle is, can calculate the position of any part of your body at any time. If you want proof of this, try closing your eyes. Try this now if you want. Close your eyes and try to put your index finger 1 inch in front of your nose. Chances are you can do it because your brain is keeping track of your using that proprioceptive sense to keep track of the position of every body part. Perhaps a more intuitive way to keep track of sensory receptors is by the type of energy we're detecting, okay? So chemoreceptors would figure out what? Chemistry, chemical energy. They would track interactions with specific chemicals, or in the case of smell, with certain categories of chemicals. Thermoreceptors track what kind of energy? That would be thermal energy or heat energy, whether there's the presence or absence of a certain amount of heat. Photoreceptors, photo is light, so light energy. Those are only found in humans. Photoreceptors are only found in our eyes. Certain other animals have photoreceptors in other parts of their body to keep track of the overall light level in their environment. Mechanoreceptors keep track of basically mechanical energy. And that's the most abstract of these. That includes things like touch, stretch, pressure. Okay. Baroreceptors are specifically receptors that track pressure. So sometimes a pressure sensor is called a mechanoreceptor and sometimes a baroreceptor. And then nociceptors, the word noxious means something that causes you pain. So nociceptors track pain, which is sort of biochemical energy, if you will, caused by tissue damage. And then a third way to track different kinds of sensory receptors, probably the hardest way to wrap your mind around, is by how long the signal lasts, or another way of thinking about that is whether the signal is constantly being updated or whether you only get a signal when something changes. Okay, so a signal that continues to send signals as long as the stimulus is present is called a tonic receptor. Okay, tonic, you can think it's got the word tone in it. If you're old enough, like me, to remember phones that hung on the wall, whenever you picked one up, there would be a dial tone, right? So a tonic receptor is like that. Whenever the phone is off the hook, you're standing upright for the balance receptors in your ear. As long as there's a sound coming in from a train going by, you will continue getting a signal coming into your head. And then as soon as you hang up the phone, the tone goes away. As soon as the train is gone, the sound signal goes away. As soon as you lie down, you no longer get the balance receptors telling you that this way is down. They immediately start sending you a signal that the other way is down. But those stimuli are, the signal is always there as long as the stimulus is there. The other option is something that's called phasic, that only produces a signal when something changes. Okay. The best way to explain the difference between these is to go back to the skin and that sense of touch that we said really has two parts, the light touch and the deep touch or pressure sense. The light touch receptors in your skin are tonic. As long as something is touching your skin, they will continue to report to your brain that something is touching your skin. The deep touch pressure receptors are phasic. And that means if you've ever, for example, put on a pair of jeans or a shirt that was too tight, when you put it on, it feels very uncomfortable. You have a sense of deep pressure in your skin. But if you continue wearing that shirt or that pair of jeans for a few minutes, you're no longer aware of it. But then at the end of the day, when you take off that shirt or that pair of jeans, what do you feel? You feel sort of a sense of relief, like that pressure has gone away. Well, your brain hasn't been ignoring the pressure all day. It's just that the pressure signal only tells you when something changes. It tells you when the pressure comes, and it tells you much, much later when that pressure goes. Similarly, if you're sitting in a seat that's too uncomfortable, at first it makes you feel kind of, sitting on a really hard bench or something makes you feel uncomfortable, but that goes away for a while, and then you eventually stand up and you feel something has, that something has gone away. So those are signals that only happen when something changes. To wrap that all together in a concrete way, here are two examples of of receptors and ways to think about them. So the retina of the eye, okay, it's got its own special organ, so it is a special sense. It is detecting what's going on in the outside world, so it is an exteroceptor. And specifically, it's picking up light energy, so it is a photoreceptor. Compare that to blood pressure sensors in your blood vessels. They are scattered throughout different blood vessels. Not all blood vessels have them, but many different blood vessels do, so it's a general sense. It's scattered around your body. It is detecting your internal blood pressure, so it's an interoceptor, and it is detecting pressure, so it is a baroreceptor. A third example might be the muscle spindles we talked about in the muscles. Those would be general senses because they're distributed throughout all of your muscles, but they would be proprioceptors rather than extero or interoceptors, and they would be detecting a physical movement of your muscle, so they're mechanoreceptors. Two concepts we're going to talk about with general senses. One is called receptive field, and the other is called referred pain. And these are both ways that your body has come up with to basically fool you into thinking that something is happening in a different place than it actually is. Okay. A receptive field refers to how many sensory nerve endings connect to a single sensory neuron. Okay? So, for example, if we have here a single neuron that branches out like so, okay, then this area is its receptive field. There's another sensory neuron that takes over this receptory field, there, and so forth and so on. If we look at the other side of that same diagram, we see a neuron coming up that has many branches, occupies a much larger territory. So that is it, its receptive field. We would say it has a large receptive field, and this has a narrow receptive field. If on the, these are really supposed to be two different parts of the body, so this is what receptive fields are like on your fingers, okay? If something touches your finger here, and then something touches your finger here, you can feel the difference. They are, it touches two completely different receptive fields. That's very helpful because humans use the skin of our hands to feel our way around the world, to grip pencils, to open doors, to do all sorts of things, to use tools, and so having small receptive fields gives us a good understanding of the environment. It's not, the body doesn't consider that at all a waste of neurons to pipe lots of neurons in right next to each other to give us that high resolution touch sense. But consider the back of the shoulder, okay? This is not one of the places that humans really use to get a sense of what's going on around us. It's just that we want to know if something is touching or not. And so we have a large receptive field there, so that if something touches us here, and then something touches us here, it feels like we've been touched in the same place. In both cases, the brain would calculate the point of touch as being the middle of that receptive field, and we wouldn't feel any difference between those two touches. This is, as far as I can tell, also the reason why sometimes you get a mosquito bite here on your shoulder or the back of your arm, and you feel it there. And so you're sitting here scratching right there, trying to put medicine on there, and in fact the bug bite is an inch over to the side. All right, so that's how receptive fields can inform you or fool you. A more clinically important thing is the idea of referred pain, okay? You may recall from our talking about the spinal nervous system that the body is divided into dermatomes, sensory regions that belong to a specific spinal nerve. So spinal nerve T1 catches all of the sensory information from the front of the arm and a little bit of the forearm. However, sensory nerve T1 also catches pain signals from the heart muscle. You're aware of, you're consciously aware at all times of the skin on the front of your arm. You are not consciously aware at most times of the feeling of your heart, whether your heart is feeling good or feeling pain. So when sensory nerve T1 gets a feeling of pain from your heart, your brain doesn't know what to do with it. It doesn't know where that is. So it refers the pain as if it came from dermatome T1. That's why many people, when they have a heart attack, explain that there is pain across their chest and down their arm, is that T1 and T2 are getting signals from the heart, which is really about here, but they feel the pain as if the pain is referred to some part of the body that the brain knows about, specifically the upper chest and the inner arm. Okay. As a practicing healthcare professional, you will eventually need to understand this, or even as a parent of a child, if you're ever in that situation, that if your child comes up to you and says that they have pain just above their umbilical region, or just at their umbilical region, or just above it, it's not actually the skin of their abdomen that is hurting. That is the body's way of localizing, referring pain from your intestines or your stomach to something it knows about your skin. So if the child's belly button or the skin just above the belly button below the ribs it feels hurt, if the child's rubbing here or here, that's a sign of gastroenteritis, of stomach and intestinal problems. A little bit further down from the navel is where the colon would report pain. Now we all know the colon runs up, over, and down. Why would you feel pain there? Because that's where that dermatome refers pain to. The appendix actually gives you a fairly large area of pain, despite the fact that the appendix itself is this tiny little organ right there. And urinary tract infections, even though this may not be exactly where they are, locate pain on the entire pelvic area. So you will not, and then again, here you can see the heart. The lung actually refers its pain to the entire cervical region. And then there are other organ areas as well. The kidney famously produces lower back pain and hip pain, even though it's really located further up here. So this is probably not something you need to memorize. I suspect that most doctors' offices have sort of a reference chart for this, but actually in terms of doing medicine, if you're the sort of person who would be a first responder to a child, or in the ER or something, in a pediatrician's office, wherever, knowing which parts of the body the child or patient are complaining about map to which internal organs might actually be having a problem is pretty important. All right, so the last part of this little mini lecture on the senses, we're going to talk about the two simplest special senses, olfaction and gustation. Both of those are classified as chemosenses. They sense a chemical change in your nasal cavity or in your saliva, whichever you're looking at. And we'll talk about those as examples of how the special senses work. I will then be spending time in class on the eyes and the ears separately. Okay. The sense of olfaction here represented by molecules of coffee drifting from a coffee cup into your upper nasal cavity. The sense of olfaction is provided by olfactory receptor cells that are actually part of the upper epithelium of your nasal cavity, which is then referred to as the olfactory epithelium. So the way the basic structure of this works, you have cranial nerve 1, the olfactory nerve, which ends in a large piece called the olfactory bulb, and then coming down from there through the cribriform plate. Remember those olfactory foramina we learned about in the bone chapter? Though each of those little holes carries an olfactory neuron or receptor cell down from the bottom surface of the brain down into the nasal cavity. And we then zoom in on that here, and you can see the olfactory bulb has sensory neurons that carry information back into the body. These are bipolar neurons. You can see there's an input pole and an output pole. And then there are individual olfactory receptor cells, sometimes called olfactory nerves, though they're not actually nerves. Actually, these are called neuroepithelial cells. They are cells that are part of an epithelium but function as nervous tissue because they have axons that carry signals out into the rest of into the central nervous system. So the way these work is that each olfactory receptor cell has a cell body. It has a dendrite, so these are also bipolar neuroendothelial cells. And it has these little things at the bottom called olfactory hairs. Each one of those olfactory hairs is covered with chemically sensitive proteins that start a local potential on the dendrite whenever they're touched by the specific kind of chemical that they are supposed to smell. So if you're smelling coffee, one of these cells is bound to be sensitive to the coffee molecules, whereas a different one might be sensitive to the smell of a rose, or a different one might be sensitive to the smell of garbage in your house. So any of these things, and actually garbage contains many different molecules, so it might hit 3 or 4 of them in just a particularly unpleasant way. So once that happens, a local potential travels to the cell body. If the smell sensation is strong enough, it will fire an action potential up here that will get passed along to the olfactory bulb cells, and they will ultimately send a signal on down the olfactory tract to the brain. Olfaction is the only special sense that actually goes directly to the conscious brain. All of the other ones are filtered through the brain stem and then the thalamus, and then they get to the conscious brain. One last thing to note here is that if you look at where the olfactory receptor cells are, they are generally at the roof of the nasal cavity and coating the superior nasal concha, which means that in order to get a sense of smell, something has to work its way all the way up to the top of the nasal cavity. By default, when we're just breathing lightly, most of the molecules we inhale are going to go straight back to our throat and down and miss the olfactory nerves entirely. So that's why if someone ever gives you a rose, for example, and you want to smell it, you breathe differently. You take a sort of deep and specific sort of breath that pulls those molecules up in, sensory molecules up into your nose. So that also explains why animals that rely more on their sense of smell, like for example dogs, instead of having a tall nasal cavity like ours, have a very long nasal cavity. So dogs, everything that enters a dog's nose is going to come in contact with one of its olfactory receptors. Slightly more complicated, working our way up the chain of special senses, is the papillae of the tongue, the sense of gustation or taste. The tongue is actually a remarkably complicated organ for how little we tend to think of it. And its surface, if you look at it carefully or even feel it carefully, you'll note that the surface is covered with little bumps. The word for a bump in anatomy speak is a papilla. Like we had dermal papillae in the skin, we've got papillae of the tongue, bumps. The most common papilla in the tongue is called filiform. It's like a file. It's a very spiky papilla. It has no taste buds. It does not help you taste anything at all. It just helps grip and move your food around in your mouth. The other 3 are sensory. There is one that is located randomly scattered throughout the anterior 2/3 of the tongue. Those are referred to, they look sort of mushroom-like, and so they're referred to as fungiform or fungiform papillae. Okay. There are ridges on the anterior 2/3 of the outside of the tongue that form folds, and so those are called the foliate papillae. And then finally, there are these papillae at the very back of the tongue that form deep valleys, circular valleys that have their taste buds on the inside. Okay, the fungiform papillae, the taste buds are all on the top because stuff is just going to kind of wash over this part of the tongue. The foliate papillae and the valate or circumvallate papillae rely on food actually, food particles actually falling into these deep trenches here or into the circular valleys there, and then they get tasted. So that the largest type is called the circumvallate papillae. It's the largest type of papillae. It's surrounded by a deep valley. This is our primary model of the tongue that we have in the lab. We'll work our way kind of from the back to the front here. You can see one of these circumvallate papillae. They form a V shape back here. And those kind of zoom in to this part. Each one of these big blocks is a zoomed in portion of the tongue. So this is obviously zoomed in from one part of that V. You've got several circumvallate papillae there, and you can see deep in the valley, the white things represent the taste buds. Okay. This is actually behind the circumvallate papilla. This shows you a tonsil within the tongue. A lingual tonsil, we'll get to those in A&P2. Moving to the middle of the tongue, you can see these little haphazard mushroom-like bumps. And that section of the skin of the tongue zooms out to here, where you can see all of the many filiform papillae, and there, once in a while, is a fungiform papilla. And then finally, over here on the side of the tongue, we have those foliate papillae, and you can see how in this case we just have a long ridge, and deep within the fold that's created by that ridge are more little white taste buds. Okay. So finally, last theme of the special senses is that in each case they have very specialized receptor cells. We saw the neuroepithelial cells of the olfactory sense. These are more neuroepithelial cells, much more epithelial looking than the previous ones. They insert themselves into the epithelium of the tongue, and wherever they exist, there's a hole in the surface of the tongue called a taste pore. And that taste pore opens up to what are called microvilli, or taste hairs, of the gustatory cells. And then when those catch the particular chemical they're sensitive to, maybe glucose that gives you a sense of sweetness, or amino acids that give you a sense of savory, meaty, or meat and beans kind of flavor, that is officially called umami, from a Japanese word. And then at the very end of these cells, they form junctions with a sensory neuron, which then integrates all of those signals, and when the senses and creates action potentials that go to one of the two gustatory nerves. If you recall, cranial nerve 7, the facial nerve, and cranial nerve 9, the glossopharyngeal nerve, both are involved in sensing taste. And then finally, to wrap this up, each special sensory pathway, with the exception of the nose, has a complicated path, sequence of neurons that carries it up into the conscious brain. So we have the primary series of neurons go from those taste buds along one of those two nerves I just mentioned, cranial nerve 7 or 9, into some part of the brain stem. At that point, they synapse with a second set of neurons that carry the sensory signal up to the thalamus. Remember, the thalamus is our routing and relay and filter organ of the brain that when the signal waits until the signal is strong enough that it's worth paying attention to, and then routes it to the correct part of the brain. So from the thalamus, neurons move forward to the gustatory complex, or gustatory cortex, and at that point, your brain becomes consciously aware that you have tasted something.